So it's not the case when many are ridiculing this system of quota, that a fantastic, well-educated, brilliant man is sidelined and a woman is given the position. Alexandra, you are probably right. I might be a feminist.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Thomas Freyang. I'm the CEO and founder of the European Diplomacy Institute, welcoming you today for the third Global Leadership Masterclass. We are very happy to organize today at the very eve of the so-called Forum Generation Equality taking place tomorrow, organized by UN Women and co-chaired by France and Mexico. This is a very special day. We will have the opportunity to run this conversation with Vice President Věra Jourová of the European Commission in charge of values, transparency, that I'll moderate with our panelists. But before we get there, I'm happy to give the floor to Professor Simon Mercado, Executive Vice President for Business and External Relations of ESCP Business School, our co-host today and strategic partner that is presenting a few items on the way they also lead the way for gender equality. Welcome, Simon, to this conversation.
Thomas, thank you very much for that kind welcome, and immediately may I say good afternoon to everybody participating in this masterclass. On behalf of ESCP Business School, the oldest business school in the world, of course, may I just say what a privilege it is to function as host and strategic partner for this event. And working with the Open Diplomacy Institute is always a great pleasure, no more so than today. And of course, Thomas may say a little bit about this when he talks to you more this afternoon, but this is, of course, an institute that in many respects was born at ESCP. Indeed, the institute was incubated at our school. Thomas did great work back in 2010, I think, originally, Thomas, in the run-up to the 2011 G20 summit, and you have a long association with the school. And it's a partnership that matters a great deal to us, given our values, our positioning, our prioritization of equality issues, inclusion and diversity issues more broadly. And as a school, certainly we feel that we've taken a leadership position in the global sector, certainly in the European context, in prioritizing the values of inclusion, diversity, and equality. And if you allow me just for a brief moment, I'll give you a little synopsis of the important work that we do as a school and some of the things that we've done. We actually have run a number of thematic conferences and seminars as a school on sexism, homophobia, consent and harassment and equality issues more broadly. We, I think, are amongst the very first business schools worldwide to have an agreement signed by all of our participating students detailing their obligations and commitment to respect diversity and the originality of each person, both on and off the campus. We, of course, in 2016, became the first business school, at least to our knowledge, the first business school to have formally instituted an LGBT charter to formalize the rights and freedoms of the LGBT community. And that's just a snapshot of the work that we do at ESCP in this space, often led by our brilliant and dedicated students, Thomas included, going back a few years now, but many have followed suit. And we, of course, have a value set at ESCP that underscores all of this. And the P in ESCP is really for plurality. And I invite you all to come back to ESCP, talk to us at ESCP about our work and the values that we represent as a school. But today is very much about the expertise of this wonderful panel that Thomas and the team have assembled for you. It's my privilege to welcome with Thomas such distinguished guests, including, of course, our Vice President from the Commission, Madam Jourova. It's a wonderful experience for all of us to be in your company today. And of course, we have with Kirsty and Alexandra and Clarisse and our full set of speakers and contributors today, voices of expertise on this very important and meaningful issue. And I shall quickly give way to allow for that dialogue to start. So thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you so much, Simon, for this kind words. And indeed, it's an honor to facilitate this conversation. It's an honor to make it happen in a European context. We've made the choice to partner with ESCP today, because ESCP is not only the oldest business school on earth, but also the first pan-European business school. And that means a lot to usher into this masterclass with Vice President Jourova. I'm happy to welcome in the conversation. May I recall to all of our listeners today is that Mrs. Jourova, you are Vice President of the European Commission and specifically in charge of values and transparency. You are in charge of gender equality amongst different topics that relates to the fundamental values of the EU. And we will have an initial conversation to just frame this reflection on gender equality. But before getting to a panel with our three guests, I'm happy to present already Mrs. Clarisse MAGNIN-MALLEZ. He's a senior partner at McKinsey & Company. Mrs. Alexandra PALT is Chief Sustainability Officer at L'Oréal, and Mrs. Kirsty LEIVERS is the Global Head for Culture, Diversity and Inclusion of AXA. So we will have a wonderful conversation with our three experts and leaders around you, Mrs. Jourova. But I should, before getting to the first question I have for you, remind the spirit of what is for us the Global Leadership Masterclass. Our aim here is to understand the way we can achieve the SDGs, the way we can deliver on the promise of the 2030 agenda. And it's all about leadership. And that's why it's so important for us to have such a conversation with such not only experts, but people who are dedicated to impact and to delivery, to make sure we don't speak, but get to action. And having that spirit of the Global Leadership Masterclass in mind, I'd like to ask you this very first question. You come from Czech Republic, right? And in the country you stem from, feminism is kind of natural, because it has been built in a communist era where women had to work. And from what I've learned about you, you rarely, if not hardly or never present yourself as a feminist, but you're one of the most powerful advocates for gender equality in the EU sphere. So I'm happy to understand more specifically this kind of contradiction from your original culture and the way you advocate for it, for gender equality from now. And we will, of course, get more into details on the agenda that you are in charge of today at the Commission.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thomas. It was not an easy question because I never thought about it like that. And of course, I can do a lot to empower women and help women in troubled positions without being a feminist or being labeled a feminist. I would have to look into the dictionary what it means. I believe that we are still in a shameful situation when we had to fight for equality. We are in the 21st century and still we have a lot of gaps, and undeserved gaps. And it's not only a matter of unfairness that the women get less money, or they get less paid jobs, or lower positions, or that the women are beaten at home, which in some parts of our society still seems to be normal. It's not only unfair, it's also unwise. And I am really, if not a feminist, I am a true believer that if we have more women in decision-making positions, the world will be better. It's really, I am convinced about that.
I'm sure we will get very into the details of this conception of the
and
word.
now on your personal question. Yes, indeed, I come from a society. I was born in 1964 in communist Czechoslovakia, and I lived in that regime till my 25. And it was the part of the culture that the women had to manage everything, to give birth to children, to work, to take care of the family, to have all those duties, and the men could help when they were willing to do that. Well, a very, very unfair setup. But I am, of course, the product of this regime, and so I had to do my own internal revolution that I do not want to continue like that. For instance, I was advised over my young years, do not speak unless somebody asks you something. So I had to translate it into speak when you have something to say. This is what I try to do now. And I have to say that my career was going up from municipal level, regional level. Then I became the minister. Now I am in the commission with one helping factor, and it was permanent underestimation. I remember all the time having around me people who were underestimating me. And it meant that I knew I have to work harder than others, because I have to climb higher hill than others. I have to be determined to get up the hill. I have to be sufficiently self-confident. And of course, what was missing was enabling environment or helping environment. And that's why now in this position, I try to create this enabling environment, but all the other things are for the women: hard work, determination, and self-confidence.
Yeah, indeed. The whole point of today, and when we speak about leadership in general, is about empowerment and the way we can deliver an enabling environment for the people we want to work with and to work for. And for that sake, I'd like maybe to cover the second question, which relates to what you've already achieved, not only as a woman in leadership position, but as a vice president of the EU Commission, priorly to that also commissioner itself for gender equality in general. You've led many reforms at the EU scale to improve gender equality, to close the gender gap, to scale up female leadership. And I'd like maybe to ask you, how do you assess the results of the different directives and regulations you've been passing at the EU Commission for the last few years?
I am normally very positive, but I can tell you I am disappointed, because we are pushing really hard. We are doing, in fact, 4 things: coming with legislation on European level and member states level, because the competences are not fully on EU level. The second, permanent campaigning, permanent funding, and training, which is connected with funding, and training many experts and professionals, for instance, against violence against women, for instance, against female genital mutilation, which is a horrible practice. There was a lot of training of doctors and lawyers and so on. I just want to be concrete what it means. In spite of this push through those 4 ways, the results are not convincing yet. And it's worse now in the recent years, and now COVID gave the last blow to it, caused that we are backsliding, we are going back. And also it's because of the strong push from populist and conservative forces in some member states. So if you want to hear the results of the reforms, pay gap, the result between 2014 and now, it's only 2%. We had the pay gap at average of EU 16%, now we have 14%. Big differences among the member states. The representation of women in listed companies between 2014, when it was 11%, now it's 25%. So it's going up. It's not because of EU legislation, but it's because of national legislation, because more than half of the member states have the quota. And there we see rapid increase, while the others are stagnating. So here we see the impact of legislation. I am not able to promote the quota on European level, but I have to try again. In politics, no, still in business, we only have 1 in 10 board chairs or CEOs in the EU, 1 in 10. So where are all fantastic educated women? We have 60% of school leavers, university leavers who are women, and then they disappear, and only 1 in 10 CEOs. Isn't it a horrible wasting of talents and of investments, if I could be a little bit brutally pragmatic? It is, I mean, this is economically totally unwise. In politics, it's not much better. In the European Parliament, we have around 40% now of women. At the national level, 33% of the national members of the parliaments. When it comes to leaders of the countries, we have now 82% of, now you are testing my memory because I don't have glasses and I cannot read it. We have 82% of leaders who are men. We have a lower number of ministers. So this is still very unsatisfactory.
And the picture you're describing is getting gloomier and gloomier, as you said, because COVID has put a stop on the progress that were made along the few recent years under the push of political influence, as you described. But there is one specific point in which the backslide is even more dangerous and hard to recognize. It's violence against women. As we've seen, violences against women increasingly faster and faster growing along different lockdowns. I know that you've been working a lot on cracking down on violences against women, and as we converge to tomorrow, the Forum Generation Equality has a strong coalition on cracking down on violences. I'm curious to know what the EU Commission can do. One question specifically in that realm. We are at fight with some members of the EU who want to remove or to slow down the ratification process of the Istanbul Convention on Violences Against Women. So I'm very curious to know how you can achieve greater results and faster results on diminishing violences against women.
Mm. Yeah, it's another big disappointment that the Istanbul Convention, this destiny is so problematic, because in some countries the ratification became the subject of tough ideological battle. And I really tried to enter in these debates and say, my God, what's ideological on trying to protect the women and children against the domestic aggressors? Yeah, but it is the harm has been done already, also in the public opinion in some member states. Part of the failure of Istanbul Convention is also in the language, because in the especially Slav country languages, there is no differentiation between gender and sex, and it causes a lot of confusion. Yeah, it's not a minor thing. So what shall we do? I cannot count anymore on the ratification, and we will adopt at the end of this year the Directive against violence against women, trying to harmonize and increase the protection in all the member states. It's a long distance run because, you know, the legislative process is rather slow in Europe. So in many member states already the protection has been increased thanks to the Istanbul Convention. But in the remaining places, well, they will have to wait for the directive. I have to mention one thing. In all the member states' penal codes, there is a qualified criminal offense, which is the violence against the vulnerable ones, against the women and children. But the issue is how it is enforced, how the victims report, whether they have trust that the crime will be properly investigated, that there will not be a secondary victimization, which is also true in many cases. So here I would like to see better implementation of the Victims' Rights Directive, which we already have. And then the acceptance in the broad societal mindset that it's a kind of normal, or the first slap does not count. This is incredibly dangerous. And here I see the backsliding. And COVID, of course, entrapped the women and children at home with the aggressors. And that's why we are really alarming and pushing the member states to do more to protect them and to enable them to escape or to get away the perpetrator from the flat and so on. This is not the matter of the magic legislation. This is the matter of respect and protection. And this must be happening now. Unfortunately, we see in many states or several states that it's not taken seriously enough.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for this initial discussion we had. I may draw a few lessons from what you just explained, not on a content, but on what it means to be in a leadership position. I should stress the fact that it's also about accounting on the results, and expressing a disappointment in achieving public policies is always an act of courage. And I should stress that out, specifically when it gets to such a topic that talks to our guts. And the other leadership lesson I may draw from this conversation is obviously the importance you give to delivery of public policies, and not passing a law, but also making sure that its implementation is at the very end of the journey fully operational. I guess those two leadership features are also features that we can share with our three guests joining us from now. Wonderful digital panelists. Just a shame we are only away from each other, but I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. I'd like to pick up back what we were just discussing about COVID with Vice President Jourova. As said, COVID has been a major disruption in the progress achieved in gender equality as a general point. On violence specifically, but it's a backslide on every aspect of gender equality in general. And that is why it is often said, and at the Open Diplomacy Institute, we advocate for this, that today's crisis needs a feminist recovery, needs a specific approach that encompasses the gender inequalities that were existing prior to the crisis and increased by the crisis. To enter into this conversation, I'd like to ask this first question to Clarisse. Clarisse, I remember all our listeners that you're a senior partner at McKinsey, and McKinsey & Company has proven data and research that in the economy in general, not in times of crisis, but that's a long way observation, there is a strong correlation between feminization of the economy and specifically of firms and their leadership and performance that we can get out of the economy. I'd like you to explain us that correlation. It's not a causality, of course, but there is a strong link, and it's interesting to get that knowledge to envision what a feminist recovery could mean.
Absolutely, and thank you for this opportunity. So absolutely, since 2007, we started to research the link between female representation in executive committees and performance of companies at micro level, and broader, I would say, economic contribution at macro level. So the findings are the following. At a global level, let's maybe start with global. We have a potential for 240 million female to join the workforce. That represents plus 11% of GDP, if those women were to join our economy, which is 12 trillion euros. So that's a very big amount at the macro level. But at a micro level, when you look at companies, we have done two segments. Companies who belong to the top quartile in terms of female representation at executive committees, and companies who have 0 women in this level of the organization. We see a gap of 47% in average return on equity, which really financially is a very important measurement. So basically, the companies that are in the top quartile for female representation have an average return on equity of 22%, and the companies who have no women are around 15%. So that's the gap of 47% that I just gave. If you do the same analysis on the average EBIT margin, you know, the companies with lots of women representation, or at least belong to the top quartile, have an average of 17%. Those who have 0 have 11%. So that's a gap of 55%. So, and these are surveys that we have refreshed almost every other year for the past 15 years. And we confirm the same pattern across a very large sample of companies. So I would say in conclusion to your question, I think working on the parity, on the women representation in business, and I would say more broadly in positions of power in the economy, is actually contributing objectively to growth and to performance.
Yeah, that is a very strong case for not only the fairness approach to gender equality, but the economic wiseness approach to gender equality, as Mrs. Jourova has let us enter into the debate. I'd like to turn to Kirsty LEIVERS, working at AXA, not only into an insurance company, but also as the HR leader for diversity and inclusion. And I'd like, Kirsty, to ask you the following question with the two-sided approach of that background. As Clarisse has pointed out, bringing female leaders and women in general in the economy means a lot in terms of productivity, return on equity, on growth in general. And an insurance company is not only an employer for itself, so where you work as an HR leader, but also as a strong, powerful asset manager and an investor. And you make choices not for the collectivity, not for the public, but for a great amount of money. AXA is one of the greatest insurance company on earth. You make decisive choices on the way to invest our money. And therefore, AXA has made strong choices on investing money in companies which accounts for a strong female leadership, as Clarisse has pointed out, with a reference to the increased return on equity. So I'd like to understand the way you've made that choice, the way you've come to that conclusion, and the way it operates now when you manage your assets and when you make decisions of investments.
Well, first of all, thank you to Clarisse, who set me up beautifully. I mean, who showed the proof of why it's so important for us to take the time to make sure the companies that we invest in have a gender equal board and make good investments in raising women. And if I start from my point of view as an HR person working in the I&D space, one of the wonderful things about our work is that although we're competitive, of course, this is one area where people should and want to share. We all have an interest in building a better world. And when a company like ours gets to invest in many other companies, of course, what that brings with it are certain influences. So we have voting rights, obviously, of those organisations that we invest in. And what we've recently set up to mirror what was set up in the UK in 2011 is the 30% investor club in France. So it already existed in the UK. And what that means is when we're working with the organisations that we invest in, and particularly the SBF 120, so the most actively traded stocks in France, we're looking at their boards, which in 2020, I'm afraid the numbers are only just being updated, but in 2020, the executive committees of those, so the C-suite in those organisations was only 21% women. So if we want to make some progress and we want to touch that great amount of potential return on equity that Clarisse mentioned to us, we need to improve that level of gender diversity. And it's a win-win, because it's a win for us as investors. We have a more successful portfolio, but we also get to support and actively work with those organizations about improving their diversity, and also, rather than just a target, which has its place, but looking at working with them on their pipeline, on the way that they recruit, attract and retain women, the way that they make sure that their environment is inclusive. And not only do we do that as our own investment portfolio, but we work with other organizations, other asset managers in France. So the 30% Club is co-chaired with us on a Monday. There are 6 other asset managers in that organization. We're competitors, but we're working together because gender equality is good for all. Is good for our portfolio, and it means we can have a coordinated approach to a structural change that in the end, as Clarisse explained with great clarity, to the amount of good, solid, robust businesses that are out there, we get sustainable growth in organizations that also positively impact society. So for us, it's an incredibly important way. Of course, we're looking at ourselves internally, and that's part of my job, but also how we influence other organizations to make the right decisions, but also to help them and work collectively to create sustainable work.
And Kirsty, you've mentioned it. That's the bone of contention. I think the structural change, the way to change the system itself, and that's why I'm grasping the opportunity of that crisis to speak about a feminist recovery, because it's also a way, we've seen it with the Next Generation EU plan that gets to issuing bonds, EU bonds on the markets. It's also changing our institutions and changing our habits and the way we make decisions. I'd like to turn back with this in mind to Vice President Jourova and ask you how you make sure that this recovery, the so-called Next Generation EU plan, is indeed not only the Next Generation EU plan, but the Generation Equality EU plan. I mean by that, how do you make sure this plan that coordinates 27 recovery plan of different nations align to deliver on gender equality in a context where this recovery is supposed to bring us beyond and to the next steps on the ecological transition, on the digital transition, sectors where women are underrepresented?
Yes, thank you. This is a very topical question because now we are in the final stretch or final round of negotiations with the member states on their recovery plans. Again, I will repeat myself, without the strong push, we would not achieve what we have achieved up to now, that there is the real impact or real effort to use the money to decrease the gaps, not to let this big amount of money to increase the gaps and thus to help COVID, because COVID is doing exactly that. We have to work against that. That's why we really tried hard to negotiate with the member states that they not only put the gender equality as the basic principle into all the financing, but also to reserve some of the money for well-targeted projects or programs which might help especially women. And we had to be really very intensive in this push from the side of the Commission, but we had the facts on our side, because if there is something incredibly unfair on COVID, it's this asymmetric impact on our societies. on different parts of the society, be it women, be it single mothers, for instance, be it those who work in social and health sector, mainly women, who also have the main burden in caring for the families. So we needed to respond on this disproportionate impact and to balance it with well-targeted money. And we speak about 672.5 billion available to member states through the Recovery and Resilience Facility. And if we have time, I have a lot of good examples of already proposed projects from the member states which will be financed. But again, it's not about individual projects only. It's about the main philosophy, which is projected throughout the whole funding. In France, I saw something very, very interesting here. Examples of how gender equality was included, quantitative targets for the appointment of women of senior management to senior management positions in the civil service. It's France. Then a lot of projects which are inviting women to digital industry, where we need them to innovate, to innovate in the proper direction, because we want digital technologies to serve all the people, and we need creative brains also from the side of women, and we need women to have better salaries, and it's mainly that, and it will be more and more the digital sector. Yeah, so here I see projects in Latvia, in Portugal, in Croatia. These are the digital related projects. Reforms to increase female labor market participation in Austria. I could continue. So yeah. Very concrete and very streamlined.
That is interesting. You don't only talk about the policy structure, but also on concrete actions that can that are actionable to deliver on the change. What is interesting, if you look a little back on the conversation, is that the importance to achieve this gender equality, but to deliver on it, but to have a structural change. There is one field in which we know from research that women will be even more asymmetrically affected than men by another crisis. It is the climate crisis and the environmental disruptions. And that's the continuation of our conversation. I'd like to turn to Alexandra PALT, which I recall is the Chief Sustainability Officer at L'Oréal. As I said, the green disruptions we are entering in are supposed to be dealt with by the recovery plan that the Next Generation EU has put. But the thing is that when we again, as usual, when we get to the table of discussion of decision making, women are, I should say, absent, because they have been off the table of negotiations of decision making, and it's even more difficult here that there is a very low degree of awareness of the disruptive and asymmetric impact of climate change on women. I know, Alexandra, you've been working a lot at L'Oréal on gender equality as a whole, but you specifically, as a specialist of sustainability issues, you're even more sensible to this question of this asymmetric impact on women of climate change. I'd like to ask you what is the cause of this disrupted impact, and how we could address it when we design our next policies on climate change.
Yes, hello, Thomas, and hello to my co-speakers. I'm very happy to be with you. So, Thomas, I'll do something which I normally would do, but I'm not only Chief Sustainability Officer, I'm Executive Vice President of the L'Oréal Group, in charge of the ecological transition and the L'Oréal Foundation and all our investments in women's rights externally to our company. And so I do think that this is important because this is part of women have to be valued for the full degree of their contribution, and that is partly related also to your question. So I'm very happy. I was very honored to listen to Commissaire Jourova, because in the first beginning I thought, what does that mean, not being a feminist? And then I heard that she is the most feminist woman I have listened to in the last month, and the most committed one. So I would consider you a feminist, and in my world it's a huge compliment, because I love your leadership on this issue. So yes, I'm a feminist too. I'm striving for a world in which women have equal rights and a role in society. And what you say, what was true for the COVID crisis, is also true for the climate crisis. In unequal societies, women will always suffer from a disproportional impact of a crisis, because they are already weakened. They are already on the low end of salaries. They are already on the edge of poverty. So all negative impact, all crisis societies go through will definitely have a disproportionate impact on women. This is true for the climate crisis. We know that women are in a lot of countries in charge of harvesting the food, producing the food, fetching the water. They are in charge of health. They are in charge of care, issues that are all going to be impacted by climate crisis. Not even speaking of climate disaster that is going to come, because we should not forget that the society we are heading to, and I think the last pre-report of the GIEC was very clear about it, the societies we are heading to are societies with major disruptive crisis and disaster. And so women are disproportionately impacted. We know when a tsunami comes, that women, because less educated, are more victims. So women in many fields are going to be more impacted. But as always, women are also part of the solution. And so women have an extraordinary potential in science. We see it with our For Women in Science program, where we have women who do a lot of interdisciplinary research, who connect the dots, because all this is interconnected: biodiversity, climate, water, all these issues are connected. We see it with women when they are start-uppers on climate issues in cities, where they propose incredible solution. And we see it when women are at the negotiation table. They are doing an incredible job. Let's think about Laurence Toubiana and Madame Figueres, who were the climate negotiators for the Paris Agreement. Let's see that the one COP that was the most successful COP, there were 2 women involved as the major negotiators. So I do not want to say that men cannot negotiate, but there women have a positive contribution. So, but still in national assemblies, 25%, Commissioner Jourova might have more precise numbers, but definitely insufficient. So women who will bear the consequences of this have to be at the table of decisions and of negotiations. And we have to take this very seriously as women, and not disinvest the political field or the European Union or international organizations or any field, because we have to be part of creating that future for us that works too.
And the example we've taken so far on climate issues to scale up female leadership, to have more results in achieving gender equality as a whole is key, and it brings us back to Clarisse. I like to broaden a bit this approach and to get to the economy in general rather than only climate change issue. Alexandra has been very clear on the results it has brought to delivering the Paris Climate Agreement, for example. Having women at the table of decision-making bodies is key and is fruitful. And Clarisse, you advise a lot of companies and CEOs in the best meritocratic ways of inclusion of women in leadership position. I'd like to learn more about the usual or main recommendations you give to those leaders to make it happen.
So I will start by saying that there is no lack of ambition of women. So when we do surveys, we ask men and women, what is your aspiration to reach a top management position in your career? 81% of the men agree or strongly agree. When we ask the same question to women, it's 79%. So it's 2 points of difference, but they are equally ambitious. The issue starts with the confidence, because the corporate culture is usually twice as important as the individual mindset of women. So typically when we ask men and women whether they feel they can be successful in their career, not if they want to be, if they think they will be, you know, in middle management, 76% of the men, 86% of the senior manager as men are confident. But when you ask the same question to women, it's 58% for middle management, 69% for senior management. So you have basically 17 to 18 points of difference. So it really starts here. The other fact I wanted to give you, because I find it really appalling in terms of the bias that we still have, and it's important to bring those facts, I think, on the table at the CEO level, is that only 43% of the men in senior management position strongly agree that women are as good leaders as men. Okay, so what do we do about it? So I think I completely agree with what Vera was saying on the fact that we need a system-wide transformation. We need the governments, we need the institutions, and frankly, we need men and women and the culture and the norms and so on to evolve. But when we advise corporations, we say a few things. Number one, it starts with the CEO and the top management. If the CEO doesn't make it a priority, if things are not moving, we have the facts that 60% of the CEOs in the best-in-class companies are CEOs who took a direct personal commitment on the topic. It's obvious, but I prefer to say it again because it really is important. The second is transparency and indicators to track. It's like sustainability. What you don't measure, you don't improve. So you need to invest in tracking things. And then you have a combination of levers. Some are targeted to women to help them in developing their leadership. So we're talking about training, coaching, sponsoring, mentoring, women networks. It takes time. It's not a quick fix. It's something you build over the years. And then you also have, I would say, hardcore things which are linked to, we call it the diversity enabling infrastructure. So we're consultants, so we love to use this type of buzzwords, but what it means is you need to have flexible working schedules. You need to allow extended leave policies. You need to have back to work programs. I personally had 4 children. Each time I came back, it was horrible. Took me a lot of energy, felt like a phoenix to get back into the place. So this is, I would say, training, investing in women to develop their leadership, and there are differences in leadership styles, and really working on the infrastructure at specific moments of their life. So I could talk for a longer time, but there are very concrete things. It has been surveyed. We have recipes. We know what works. It's just not a quick fix. But if companies are committed to putting those things in place, it works.
And you've made it. It's a long-term issue that you've been describing very clearly. And there is one point I'd like to snap back at. It's start with the CEO. And when we look at the EU Commission, the new CEO, if I may, is a woman. The president of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has also embodied herself, not only the change of policies, but also a change of style and a change of inspiration for the whole EU political community. I'd like to turn back to Vice President Jourova and see, you've been acting also in the Juncker Commission before that. I'd like to know whether it has changed the so-called enabling environment that you needed. Confidence and trust is at the core of all our conversations since the beginning. How did it make a difference? And specifically in the context where what we've witnessed recently in Ankara with the Sofagate has also damaged that image of a strong female leader at the top level of the EU Commission?
Yes, thank you for this question. When Clarisse said that from the CEO there has to be direct personal commitment, I immediately remembered Ursula von der Leyen because this is exactly her case. Well, Jean-Claude Juncker also, I think, tried to create this enabling environment, or how did you call it, diversity enabling system. But I have to say that the push was weaker. let's face it. And the start of Ursula also was marked by this change of atmosphere and really strong determination to get the women to the decision-making positions quicker. So now we have, I think, already more than I think 43% of women in the senior management positions. And we will also upgrade the human resources strategy to add those other elements which Clarisse spoke about to create the truly diversity enabling system. To achieve those 43%, it was the really matter of permanent push and systematic work. And if you want, yes, applying some kind of quota in the way when there were comparably well-qualified candidates, a man and a woman, the woman got the priority because of the underrepresentation of women in the structures. So it's not the case when many are ridiculing this system of quota that a fantastic, well-educated, brilliant man is sidelined and a woman is given the position. Alexandra, you are probably right. I might be a feminist. But well, we know why we are doing that, because the mixture of men and women, well, this is creating a bigger quality. And Clarisse spoke about the impact in business, where it is better, maybe measurable, yeah, the performance in businesses than in public sector. But I have to say that when you have a mixture of the proper men and proper women in the decision-making positions, you are able to come with balanced and well thought through decisions also in the times of crisis. And let's face it, again, we are in a permanent crisis and now dominated by COVID. And on Ursula, you would be surprised, at my high age, she is the first boss, a female boss in my career. I had one when I was 19, selling the cookies in a bakery shop. So it was a good lesson. So now Ursula is my first real boss, and I have to say I have big admiration for also her combination of being tough and being emotional and readable and honest. Maybe also the emotions. It's my theory that as a woman politician, you can deploy more emotions to express what you think, because when the men are deploying or showing emotions, it's always the case when they are upset. But Ursula is also showing emotions when she's happy, when she's positive, when she wants to encourage others. So yes, it is a difference, but nothing against Jean-Claude. He was great as well.
It's a long way since then, the cookie selling period of Věra Jourová, but it's a funny story that, and it's a sad story itself too, that it's the first female boss you have. I'd like to keep discussing on the way we can deliver that change, and specifically in engaging men in delivering on gender equality. And therefore, I will turn back to Alexandra and Kirsty, because the two companies they do represent today, Alexandra as executive vice president of L'Oréal with a very broad portfolio she's described earlier, and Kirsty at AXA. The two companies are led by men. The two companies share this very specific feature that the two CEOs are very committed to following up with achieving gender equality. So I'd like kindly to ask both of you the same question, and maybe with a specific side for Kirsty, how have you seen that change, that the tone of the top is different? And what is that? What's the spillover effect that you've seen in the two companies that you lead? Alexandra, for example, I know L'Oréal has a very strong program for balancing the work-life balance when a baby is born, for example, and you've put a lot in place to make sure that daddies as mummies are able to welcome a baby, which makes a strong change. When it gets to AXA, your company is very challenged by the fact that the financial industry is a very male industry, and changing habits here is very difficult. So when it gets to the two companies you run, first Alexandra and then Kirsty, how the tone of the top of the CEO committed to gender equality has changed or enabled change? Maybe Alexandra first.
Thank you very much. So I would like, I'll build on the answers of my colleague speakers. So I do think there is something, I have seen that when I work on women in science, and very often people say confidence and women have to go, and I digged a little bit more in it, and there is a lot of issues around obstacles too. There is a lot of issues, because I do not want to let women also carry the responsibility for their discouragement when they face so many obstacles. So yes, there is an issue of confidence, but there is also an issue of the daily work environment, of the daily obstacles. Well, in science, it's particularly important still. So in businesses, it's better, but we have to be aware, daily sexism, daily, and Mrs. von der Leyen has recently experienced it, this kind of behavior, it is not acceptable anymore. Women still have to confront that. And so I think that might discourage, because not all women do want to go to go through this and to lead that fight. So at L'Oréal, I think that where we have made the biggest step forward, and that's what I'm very proud of, it's not just the work-life balance and equal pay, that's basics nowadays. But that's also, nowadays, when you are in a meeting, or when you are seeing an ad, or when there is something where you think, guys, this is not completely it. Yeah, there is a small hint of sexism here in this joke or in this remark. Now you can say it, you can say it, and you can say, okay, I'm sure you're not doing it on purpose, but let me tell you how I feel about that, and that this is not acceptable. And it's well received. And I think that's the hugest cultural change that is necessary, because there is a lot of written policies, and in companies, there is now awareness, for example, especially at L'Oréal, that you need women to be successful. But I think this cultural change is really important. We have now, for example, complete transparency on the number of harassment and discrimination cases every year. So once a year, the ethics officer with our HR officer sends to every employee around the world the number of cases that have been filed for harassment or discrimination, how they were treated, who had to leave how many people had to leave the company because, and so on and so on. And this transparency empowers women, but to a point that that this is not normal, and you do not have to do anything to accept any of this abnormal behaviors, which we are all, at least I'm 50. I know how many jokes I went over without saying something, thinking, okay, I'll not pay attention to it because I will be just represented as this boring feminist who cannot even understand a joke, especially in French culture. Excuse me, I'm sorry. There is still this issue. So I did that a lot in my career, and I do not have to do it anymore. And I'm so relieved about that because now I feel sincerely empowered, and I think this is important.
That's two very good practical lessons of the spillover effect of this tone at the top, fighting for an equal culture and against daily sexism, and putting transparency at heart of all policies to achieve it. What's the lessons we can take from AXA, Kirsty?
Well, thank you. And first of all, when Clarisse was running through her list, I was checking that we were doing them at AXA and seeing what I could learn. So I will react to those and also to Alexandra, because I agree that the creating the right culture, that step, and we also see the influence of external factors on that is really, really key. One of the problems that we face, well, two of the problems, Thomas, because you mentioned one is, of course, we've been talking about this for quite a long time now. So as a topic, gender's not new, and that gives us a certain barrier to overcome because it's hard to keep people's interest, and it starts to be an excuse to be less motivated. And of course, as you mentioned, we are an industry which is still heavily male dominated, and we have a male leader, but we have a male leader that speaks with conviction. So if I can say, even after all this time, what you need to make sure is that you have a leader that's now been in place for a few years, that you feel his level of conviction, which helps the people that are coming up through the organization understand that the belief is there. Because men, of course, feel challenged by the idea of gender equality, unfortunately, in some cases. There's a little competition there to get the roles, and you touched on that earlier. I do think that the work that L'Oréal have done and that we have done to make the wins for women wins for men as well. So things like parental policies that give people equal rights and access to time off, working policies that give the people the flexibility to have a work outside of life, were there for women. And in reality, men can take advantage and should if they're written in the right way too, which is what we did with our parental policy. So there's a policy piece. If I look at Clarisse's list, I agree that we need measurements. And one of the challenges is for a male leader that speaks with great conviction and continues to use every opportunity to remind people of his conviction, is that everybody looks at every action. And that's hard because not every action looks like it goes in exactly, it can't be every time a woman. And sometimes when it's a woman, people say the wrong thing. So coming back to Alexandra's point, to be at that place where we're very clear on the reasons that we take and why we take them. So every decision, be it for a man for the job or for a woman for the job, needs to be clearly articulated. So I think the storytelling, the proof that it's important, we're a numbers company, so measuring it to a certain extent is important. And then if I come back to Clarisse's list on the leadership wide side, Thomas himself makes time to mentor, to take time to talk about these topics, also to mentor people from different backgrounds. I mean, inclusion is about things other than gender, and every step towards inclusion helps the other underrepresented minorities. Having a leader that cares is my biggest point, and articulates clearly that he cares. Helps a lot, both the men and the women understand the direction of the organization.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. We will host questions from the audience very soon, but I'd like to circle back one last time with Vice President Jourova in asking that question. I know you're in charge of, as we usually say, gender mainstreaming EU policies. And that must be a huge task because policies of the EU Commission are very wide. But maybe if I should ask you one question to grasp the results you can get in gender mainstreaming EU policies, is the following one. How do you assess your ability to involve men in delivering gender equality within the EU Commission?
Yeah, they are almost minority now, so it's okay. Of course, we are a team. We are a team, and I think that we understand both sides, women and men, in the Commission. That we need to do more for to create a society where there will be those two important things: respect and equal opportunity for women. It sounds simple, but it requires a lot of work to push it into the policies, which is not only legislation. So we have good cooperation, and 2 examples from the recent time, the legislation on artificial intelligence, very good work. Everybody understood that AI world must not copy paste the bias and inequality which we see in real life. The second thing, it's more technical, and it's also connected with what you said about the how did you say it, back to work program for the women or the working parents who have small children. Such a small thing which will create big result. Still recently in our big EU funding, especially in cohesion policy, we had the kindergartens and services like creches taken as expenditure, and we said this is for the member states to invest in it. That's just an expenditure. And I came with the figures which show that it's the investment with very quick rate of return, because the working parents, especially women, are coming back because they have available services. They are coming back to work. So we worked with economic figures, and so we changed completely the paradigm of the funding, and now we are offering the EU money also for these kind of services. This is a practical example of gender mainstreaming, where, believe me, the men were cooperating very well. So no time for complaints.
Thanks, Mrs. Jourova. This is indeed a good space of progress. You started with expressing your disappointment, and we come to a more positive conclusion. Clarisse, we're planned to leave us at 10 to 5, but it's also time for questions. We will welcome two people from the audience asking you questions. I'd like to welcome Matteo Oldani as Michelle Guima. I love to take questions in pair, one man and one woman. It's not because of gender equality topic of today. That's my usual way of moderating panels for the last 10 years. So it's a pleasure to have 2 questions. I'd like to ask Michelle first, and then Matteo to ask their questions, and we will see how we can handle them and give them to our different panelists.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the session. It's been really insightful. Just to say, I have got to go and do the nursery run in 6 minutes, so I will stay for as long as I can. But my question is around responsibility, and there is so much information out there for women in particular around being more confident and negotiating more, etc. And I work with organizations around closing pay gaps. And one of the things that strikes me is that I think also there's responsibility for organizations too, for them to be able to upskill themselves in how to hold better conversations about pay and about career progression, and how to understand where their biases might be coming and kind of taking over in terms of making wrong decisions based on the biases that they may have. And I wanted to put it to the panel, is that something that you think that organizations should be doing, as well as us, you know, talking about women being more confident, etc.? Because my worry is that we're placing all of the onus on women to do more asking, and then we have organizations who are, you know, not being more inclusive and who are perpetuating pay gaps, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We will take the question from Matteo and then decide how we can split them.
Okay, nice to meet you. My question was regarding the smart working. So what do you think about the smart working, since it's more or less 1.5 years that we are in smart working, if possible? And if you think that could be a good way not only to balance family and workload, but also to have a more gender equality. Also could be a, let's say, a step to go in this kind of direction. And what do you think about, since I know there is, especially in Italy, some senior manager or some manager that are against smart working, and what do you think what we could do to push in that direction to measure how it's done the smart working, if it's done effective, and if could effectively help gender equality or not?
Thank you, Matteo. Well, thank you both for your questions. Very, very topical indeed. I'd like maybe to ask Kirsty to cover the first question by Michelle on the way conversations within a firm that's also about management practices and HR policies, they can foster gender equality. From an HR perspective, I'd like to ask the same question to Alexandra, because being an executive VP in such a worldwide firm as L'Oréal means having a very strong management position with great teams, and the way to address teams can have a spillover effect on the way conversations and negotiations can be run for when you get to the paycheck, for example. So I'd like the two managers here to ask from an HR and from a management perspective the question, and maybe I'd like to ask Mrs. Jourova to answer the question by Matteo, because you've been working a lot on work-life balance in your previous tenure as a commissioner when you worked on this directive. The COVID has obviously changed a lot the landscape of the workplace, and maybe taking lessons of remote working, for example, can be also an inspiration for the next EU legislation, and maybe that's something you could tell us about on the way you reflected it at the EU level. So that's how I like to split the questions.
So I jump in and I go very quickly because I see how much time we have. So Michelle, fabulous question. I think you're absolutely right. We need to look at the organizational way that pay is reviewed. And I spot three specific things. One is what's valued in an organization. So which jobs are the highest paid and where do we find the lower paid jobs, and are we finding a gender mismatch in those? I think we have a challenge in terms of the things that we value. Then I think there's the way that decisions are made. And there are two pieces here. One that we can do around education. So you're right, not asking the woman, but making sure that managers are educated in careful decision making and having the right conversations. But then also running the analysis underneath that. So comparing, once the year-end review or the grades and the promotions and the bonuses are in place, to look if we see differences in what's allocated and how that's done. So I think there are three very briefly things that we can do. And like with any of the gender topics, we can't always make it the woman's fault and the woman's problem to solve, but an organization problem that we solve together. That was as quick as I could.
Yeah, that was fast and furious. Alexandra, I'd like to know how you manage your teams and try to inspire confidence when we get to those type of discussions.
Yeah, so I think that indeed Kirsty brought an excellent answer, and we are doing a lot of studies to understand internally. So we do not have a relevant pay gap anymore because we did studies with universities to find out all this. There's an issue, for example, around expats, making sure that the positions that lead to the top, and how do you get women into the positions that lead to the top? So you have expatriation, so why women didn't go there, what can we do to bring them there? So all this was done. We also train women for the negotiations in order to challenge us more. So I think this is a really important. I felt it, so I sent my teams to this kind of training. So when they come back, it's much tougher for me, and I think that is good, because that means really empowering them. So I see that Michelle had to leave us, so I would like to answer just a few words on Matteo before I let Vice President Jourova be much more informed on that. But from my experience, so first of all, for example, I do not at all believe that you call it smart working, or I call it working from home is a solution for allowing more gender equality. What we found out, for example, when we look into women scientists, they have published less papers. They have published less papers because indeed, when they are at home, they are taking more time for taking care of their children and household work. So we live in unequal societies in which a lot of domestic or work related to caregiving functions are taken on by women. So in general, this is a disadvantage for women, as it is to be, you know, I mean, we also look at the numbers of violence against women, the exposure to be all the time at home and to have not the possibility to get out of any abusive relationship is really not positive for women. So I do think that going to work, being in a professional context, be recognized as a professional is extremely valuable for women and is a condition for our achievement of gender equality. That this can be, of course, hybrid and should be more, take into account some flex work and 1 or 2 days from home. That is different. But you know, working from home is, when we look into the numbers and results, not a good idea for women.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Indeed, Michelle said she was committed to leave a bit earlier to care for her children, but she got the answer. She said thanks, and thanks for covering Matteo's question too, which brings me back to Mrs. Jourova. Do you share Alexandra's point that remote working is not a solution to achieve gender equality and to better balance work life with personal life?
Yes, I do, and I'm happy Alexandra said it so clearly. I think that for women this is a trap, because the social aspect or function of work as a collective endeavor where you meet people, I think this is a very, very valuable aspect which is connected with the work. So I see especially the combination of home office work and not functioning services and closed schools. I think this is something which is really falling directly on women, more on than on men. But to be honest, I have in my cabinet working fathers, and they of course face the same troubles as the female colleagues. So there are two dangerous developments: keeping on telework longer than necessary. In other words, of course, the world will not be, and the world of labor will not be the same after COVID. We all know that. But to do it in a proportionate way with respect to also the psychological side of the work and so on will be very important, especially for women, I would say. And the second thing, digitalization, which we are intensely now investing in Europe, will do such a revolution on the labor market, which I'm afraid that without positive incentives for women, it will be just another disaster for gender equality, not in favor of women. So again, we try to come with the digital transition as a very strong policy, accompanied by incentives and by proactive policies to open up the possibilities for the women to keep or to have jobs in that sector. Because when we saw the statistics or some surveys which say that due to digitalization, the world will lose, it's a global figure, 50 million jobs, but the digitalization and AI will offer 60 million jobs. Well, that's a stupid comparison, because we might easily see that it will not be the jobs for those who have lost the jobs. Yeah. So we will have to really do the proper planning of the labor market perspectives for both men and women, and not to lose this opportunity, not to create a new kind of inequality, which would really be very detrimental. I wanted to close positively, but well, I believe we will manage. This is the positive.
But it's positive to keep our attention drawn on the right topics. I'd like to thank you all for answering those questions and be at the rendezvous of this Global Leadership Masterclass. Mrs. Jourova, you just closed the conversation on the digital revolution, and it's indeed one of the 6 major topics that the UN Women Forum, Generation Equality, co-chaired by France and Mexico, opening in Paris tomorrow morning, will cover, along violences against women's leadership, against justice in the economy, against again, with having women involved in managing the climate crisis, and also fighting for their sexual rights. That's all the key topics that the UN Generation Equality Campaign will cover for the next 5 years, 26 years after adopting the so-called Beijing platform on women's rights. That was the very meaning of today's specific Global Leadership Masterclass with you, Mrs. Jourova, and our fellows from AXA, Kirsty, from L'Oréal, Alexandra, and from McKinsey, Clarisse, which L'Oréal and AXA are 2 also partners of the Open Diplomacy Institute. I'd like to warmly thank for their commitment and support to our conversations and reflections. So is ESCP, our strategic partner and co-host today. I'd like to thank warmly Professor Mercado for having opened that conversation. And before wrapping up, essentially saying that it's the 3rd masterclass we have. The 4th one is also with a wonderful woman in leadership position, Judy Wakungu, we host on the 7th of July. She's the former Environment Minister of Kenya and Ambassador of Kenya to France, Portugal, and many different other European countries. It's a good sign that actually Global Leadership Masterclass go along with women only so far. We are very proud of it, and it's always very fruitful of insights. Thanks all of you for that wonderful and very meaningful panel, specifically to Mrs. Jourova, Vice President of the EU Commission in charge of values and transparency. We welcome you to the next EU Global Leadership Masterclass on the 7th of July with Mrs. Wakungu.